Welcome to a tour of New York City in 1929, the final year of the Roaring Twenties and the last moments before everything changed. This was the golden age of American prosperity, when New York stood as the undisputed capital of the modern world, a gleaming metropolis of steel and stone, where fortunes were made in minutes and the future seemed limitless. Using advanced AI technology, we've transformed old photographs, newsreels, and archival images into photorealistic scenes that will transport you back nearly a century. Today, you'll walk the streets as they actually were, see the faces of people who lived through this extraordinary time, and witness a city at the absolute height of its power. But beneath the glittering surface of Art Deco towers and champagne-soaked speakeasies, there existed a stark divide. While Wall Street bankers drove Packards and dined at the Waldorf Astoria, millions of working-class New Yorkers crowded into tenements, struggling to survive on mere dollars a week. The wealthy lived like royalty. The poor lived like they always had, invisible to those above. By the end of this journey, we'll witness the single moment that brought this entire world crashing down. Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. The day the stock market collapsed and changed America forever. But first, let's step back in time to see this city in all its glory. Block 1. Wall Street and the Financial District. This is Wall Street, the nerve center of American capitalism and the most powerful street in the world. In 1929, this narrow canyon of towering buildings pulsed with an energy unlike anywhere else on Earth. The New York Stock Exchange, housed in its neoclassical temple at the corner of Broad Street, was where the fate of nations was decided daily. Outside, the street swarmed with messengers, brokers, and businessmen in dark suits and bowler hats, their faces urgent, their steps quick. The air buzzed with shouted orders and the constant clatter of ticker tape machines spilling from office windows above. The people here were the masters of the universe, or thought they were. Millionaires were made before lunch. Ordinary clerks, secretaries, and shoeshine boys played the market on margin, borrowing money to buy stocks that only seemed to go up. Everyone had a tip. Everyone had a system. The wealthy arrived in chauffeur-driven limousines, stepping out onto marble sidewalks, to conduct business worth more than most Americans would earn in a lifetime. The smell of cigar smoke mixed with automobile exhaust. The sound was a constant roar. Engines, voices, the rhythmic ding of streetcars. At night, the buildings lit up like vertical cities, their windows glowing gold against the dark sky, as traders worked late into the evening, counting their gains. Today, Wall Street remains the financial capital of the world. The stock exchange building still stands, though it's now surrounded by security barriers and surveillance cameras. The street itself is narrower than you might imagine, still shadowed by the towering buildings that line it. But the wild optimism of 1929, the belief that prosperity would never end, that vanished on a single October day. Block 2. Fifth Avenue and the world of luxury. This is Fifth Avenue, the grandest shopping street in America, stretching from Washington Square Park to Central Park. By 1929, Fifth Avenue had transformed into a canyon of consumption and elegance. Department stores like Bergdorf Goodman, Saks Fifth Avenue, and Lord & Taylor displayed their wares behind massive plate glass windows, each one a theatrical production designed to entice the wealthy. Mannequins wore the latest Paris fashions. Dropped-waist dresses, cloche hats, fur stoles that cost more than a working man's annual salary. The sidewalks belonged to two very different worlds. Well-dressed women in silk stockings and T-strap heels stepped out of taxis, their arms laden with shopping bags, their lips painted dark red in the fashion of the day. Doormen in elaborate uniforms stood at attention outside luxury apartment buildings like the Sherry Netherland and the Pierre. Meanwhile, newspaper boys shouted headlines on corners, and street vendors sold chestnuts and pretzels, trying to scrape together enough for rent. The automobile had transformed the street itself. Yellow cabs, already a New York institution, jockeyed for position with private cars. Double-decker buses rumbled past. The honking was constant, the traffic chaotic, the energy intoxicating. This was modernity in motion, progress made visible. At St. Patrick's Cathedral, completed just decades earlier, wealthy parishioners arrived for Sunday Mass in furs and jewels, while immigrant Irish laborers who had built the cathedral prayed in the back pews. The contrast was impossible to ignore. But in the boom times of 1929, most chose to look away. Today, Fifth Avenue remains one of the world's most expensive shopping districts, though many of the grand department stores have closed or moved. The buildings have grown even taller, dwarfing those of 1929. The wealth is still there, but so is the inequality, perhaps even more pronounced than it was a century ago. The more things change, it seems, the more they stay the same. Block 3, the Speakeasy, Underground. This is a speakeasy, one of thousands of illegal bars operating in New York during Prohibition. Finding one required knowing the right people and the right passwords. This particular establishment, hidden behind a fake tailor shop on West 52nd Street, could only be accessed through a back door, down a narrow staircase, and into a basement transformed into a world of jazz, cigarette smoke, and illegal liquor. Inside, the air was thick and hot despite the late hour. A jazz band, black musicians from Harlem hired to play for wide audiences, filled the room with the syncopated rhythms that defined the era. Trumpets wailed, a double bass thumped, and a piano player's fingers flew across the keys. On the tiny dance floor, couples did the Charleston and the Black Bottom, their movements fast and free, a rebellion against the Victorian propriety of their parents' generation. The clientele was mixed in ways that would have been unthinkable in most of America. Wealthy socialites sat next to Broadway actors, journalists, gangsters, and artists. Women smoked openly, something still considered scandalous in polite society. Women smoked openly, something still considered scandalous in polite society. Everyone drank bootleg gin or whiskey, served in teacups in case of a police raid. The alcohol was often dangerously poor quality, distilled in basement stills or smuggled from Canada, but no one seemed to care. The smell was unforgettable, a mix of perfume, sweat, tobacco smoke, and spilled alcohol. The noise was overwhelming, a constant assault of music, laughter, and shouted conversations. This was the dark heart of the Roaring Twenties, where the rules didn't apply and tomorrow never seemed to come. Of course, all of this was technically illegal. The 18th Amendment had banned alcohol in 1920, but in New York, Prohibition was treated as a joke. Police were paid to look the other way. Politicians drank in the same clubs they were supposed to be shutting down. The real winners were organized crime syndicates, who made millions supplying the city's insatiable thirst. Today, the speakeasy culture has been romanticized and revived. Trendy bars across New York mimic the hidden entrances and vintage cocktails of the Prohibition era, but the original establishments are long gone, their secret locations lost to history. The buildings that housed them have been demolished or converted into luxury condos, their rebellious past buried under layers of gentrification. Block 4, Times Square and the Great White Way. This is Times Square, already known as the crossroads of the world and the beating heart of American entertainment. By 1929, Times Square had exploded into a carnival of electric light and motion. Enormous illuminated signs advertised Broadway shows, cigarettes, automobiles, and Coca-Cola. The Wrigley Spearmint Gum sign alone used 17,000 light bulbs. At night, the square was brighter than day, a man-made constellation that could be seen from miles away. This was the future made real, a testament to American technological power and commercial ambition. The streets teemed with humanity from all walks of life. Theatergoers in evening dress headed to see the latest musicals. Quote one was still playing to packed houses. Street performers juggled and danced for spare change. Hustlers worked the crowds. Pickpockets practiced their trade. Prostitutes solicited openly, despite periodic police crackdowns. The theaters themselves were palaces of fantasy. The Paramount, the Capitol, the Roxy, massive movie palaces that could seat thousands, decorated in ornate styles that mixed Art Deco with Moorish and Egyptian influences. Inside, audiences watched the new, quote, two that had revolutionized cinema. Al Jolson's The Jazz Singer had premiered just 2 years earlier, and now silent films were rapidly becoming obsolete. The smells of Times Square were a democratic mix. Hot dogs and popcorn from street vendors, exhaust from the endless traffic, the sweet, sour smell of spilled beer from nearby bars. The sounds were a constant cacophony. Taxi horns, street musicians, the rumble of the subway beneath your feet, the shouts of newspaper boys hawking the latest editions. But even here, in this temple of popular entertainment, class divisions were clear. Orchestra seats cost several dollars, a significant sum when the average worker made perhaps $20 a week. The balconies were cheaper, filled with working-class families and immigrants seeking a few hours of escape from their difficult lives. Today, Times Square remains the most visited place in New York, though it has been sanitized and corporatized beyond recognition. The grittiness is gone, replaced by chain restaurants and Disney stores. The theaters still stand, but the sense of dangerous possibility that defined the 1929 version has been carefully scrubbed away. What was once thrilling is now merely bright. Block 5, the tenements of the Lower East Side. This is the Lower East Side, specifically a tenement building on Orchard Street, where the other half of New York lived. While Fifth Avenue glittered and Wall Street counted its millions, hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers crowded into buildings like this one, dark, airless, and desperately overcrowded. A typical tenement apartment measured just 300 square feet, with no private bathroom and minimal ventilation. Entire families, parents, children, sometimes grandparents, shared these tiny spaces. Many took in boarders to help pay the rent, sleeping in shifts. The building housed primarily Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, though Irish, Italian, and Chinese families lived on nearby blocks, each ethnic group clustering together for mutual support in a city that offered little welcome. The men worked in garment factories, construction sites, or as peddlers. The women took in piecework, sewing clothes at home for pennies per garment. Children as young as 10 worked after school to help the family survive. The streets outside were a sensory assault. Pushcart vendors shouted in Yiddish, Italian, and broken English, selling everything from pickles to used clothes. Laundry hung on lines strung between buildings, creating canyons of damp fabric. The smell was overwhelming. Unwashed bodies, rotting garbage, coal smoke, the sour smell of poverty concentrated in too small a space. Life here was hard in ways difficult to imagine today. Infant mortality was high. Disease spread quickly in the cramped conditions. Fire was a constant threat, yet there was also community, mutual aid, and a fierce determination to give the next generation a better life. Children played stickball in the streets. Neighbors helped each other through illness and unemployment. Religious and social organizations provided what little safety net existed. The wealthy of Fifth Avenue rarely, if ever, ventured here. These were the people who made the clothes, cooked the food, built the buildings, and cleaned the offices that made New York the greatest city in the world. Today, the Lower East Side has been almost entirely transformed by gentrification. The old tenements have been converted into expensive lofts. The pushcarts are gone, replaced by artisanal coffee shops and boutique galleries. A few buildings remain as museums, carefully preserved to show modern New Yorkers how the other half once lived. The immigrant struggle continues. But now it plays out in other boroughs, other neighborhoods, always pushed farther from the center as the city grows ever more expensive. Climax, Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. And then everything fell apart. The warning signs had been there for months, but few wanted to see them. Stock prices had climbed to absurd levels, far beyond the actual value of the companies they represented. Ordinary people had borrowed heavily to invest, convinced that prices would only continue to rise. Banks had loaned money recklessly. The entire economy had become a pyramid scheme, sustained only by collective faith that it would never end. On Thursday, October 24th, the market stumbled. Panic selling began. Prominent bankers met in emergency session and pledged their own money to stabilize prices. For a few days, it seemed to work. The crisis appeared contained. Then came Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. From the opening bell, it was chaos. Sell orders overwhelmed the system. The ticker-tape machines couldn't keep up, falling hours behind the actual trading. Outside the stock exchange, crowds gathered, their faces tense, watching for any sign of hope. Inside, on the trading floor, grown men shouted themselves hoarse, desperately trying to unload stocks that were plummeting by the minute. By the end of the day, 16 million shares had been traded, a record that would stand for decades. Billions of dollars in value had simply evaporated. Millionaires became paupers in a single afternoon. Ordinary investors who had borrowed to buy stocks now owed more than they owned. The American economy, which had seemed unstoppable just days before, revealed itself to be built on sand. The immediate aftermath was devastating. Banks failed by the hundreds, taking depositors' life savings with them. Businesses collapsed. Unemployment skyrocketed. Within months, bread lines stretched for blocks in the same streets where, just a year earlier, people had bought luxury goods without a second thought. Shantytowns, bitterly nicknamed Hoovervilles after President Hoover, sprang up in Central Park and along the rivers, housing families who had lost everything. The psychological impact was perhaps even greater than the economic one. The crash shattered the fundamental American belief in inevitable progress, in the idea that hard work and smart investing would always lead to prosperity. An entire generation learned that the system they had trusted could betray them, that security was an illusion, that the powerful cared nothing for the vulnerable. This Great Depression that followed would last for a decade, ending only when World War II forced the economy into overdrive. It would reshape American politics, leading to the New Deal and fundamentally changing the relationship between government and citizens. It would alter American culture, making a generation permanently cautious about debt and speculation. Today, October 29th is remembered as one of the darkest days in American economic history. The stock exchange still operates in the same building, though trading is now almost entirely electronic. Regulations put in place after 1929, including circuit breakers that halt trading during extreme drops, try to prevent another such collapse. Yet markets still crash, bubbles still burst, and each generation seems destined to learn the same painful lesson. What goes up must eventually come down. Conclusion. The New York of 1929 was a city of stunning contradictions, fabulous wealth and desperate poverty, boundless optimism and deep inequality, technological marvels and human suffering existing side by side on the same streets. Behind the grand facades of Art Deco skyscrapers and the glittering lights of Times Square, millions struggled simply to survive. The prosperity of the Roaring Twenties was real, but it was never shared equally. When the crash came, it was the vulnerable who suffered most, while many of the wealthy managed to protect their fortunes. Yet this era left an enduring legacy. The skyscrapers of the 1920s still define New York's skyline. The cultural innovations, jazz, cinema, a new freedom for women, transformed American society permanently. Even the Great Depression itself led to reforms that, for a time, created a more equitable society and protected ordinary people from the worst excesses of capitalism. The New York of 1929 is gone, swept away by the very catastrophe it failed to see coming. But its ghosts remain, visible in the buildings that survived, in the rhythms of the city's streets, in the eternal American tension between wealth and poverty, optimism and reality, the dream and the reckoning. If you enjoyed this journey through time, please comment below telling us what city and what era you'd like to see brought to life next. Should we visit Paris during the Belle Époque? London in the Victorian era? Berlin in the 1920s? Your suggestions guide our travels through history. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the past. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the past.